Morning, everyone. If you can hear me and you can see me, please nod your head.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, Stephen. Again. I can hear, but you seem to be breaking. Or is it from my end?
Okay. So welcome to our webinar. This is the 14th webinar in our series of webinars we've been holding for since, I think, for 2 months now. Okay. So this is the 14th webinar, and the topic today is the challenge of food security amid the COVID pandemic. So we've been holding a series of webinars. And I have a panel of experts who will be looking at this issue more in depth. But just to give us a brief background, for those who are not conversant, the IEA, that's the Institute of Economic Affairs, is a public policy think tank whose mandate is to undertake research in thematic areas that actually lead to influence of policy in the country. Our work is arranged around 5 programs, namely the Public Finance Management Program, Constitutional Law and Economy, Trend and Development, Futures Methodologies, and Regulations and Competition Policy Program, under which I work. So just to bring us up to speed, in the last 2 or let me say 1.5 years, the program has been looking at the issues of food security, or so to speak, agriculture and food security. And a variety of issues have arisen therein. And in the last 2 months, since the pandemic came to the fore, I think a lot of issues have also come to the fore that actually touch on issues of food security. If we can remember well, Kenya has been faced over a period of time, actually, for decades, with instances of lack of food, or adequate food for that matter, and to actually try and ensure that we don't slip to very adverse conditions, we've resorted to importing food stuff from other countries, even our neighbors, Uganda and Tanzania. So that's just to try and bridge the gap that arises mostly due to natural calamities such as drought and floods, and more recently, actually, the locust menace, which is being now said that will cause some food shortages in our country. But that notwithstanding, there are issues again that abound that when you try to look at issues of food security, it's not in itself a standalone. There are issues as well that you need to look out for, such as food security goes with nutrition. So again, not having enough maize doesn't mean that we are food secure, as some would have thought. I actually thought so as well initially. But now, how does the nutrition value come into play? So maybe that would be something that we'll look at in our future webinar. Just look at issues of nutrition. But for today, our panelists, and I'll introduce them, as you can see from the program. Mr. Jerome Gushero, who is an IEA associate, and we work together on a policy brief on issues to consider towards ensuring food security in the country. So we'll be looking at just what is the status of food security. And then we have Mr. Emmanuel Atamba, who I like to refer to as, yes, he's raised his hand. I like to refer to as the Route to Food Ambassador. I welcome Mr. Emmanuel. He'll also be giving us some insights that we also must take into consideration. And then we have a practitioner on the ground, Ms. Felista Orangi, who is the Assistant Farm Manager with Ololo Farm. I think she's much more placed to tell us exactly what's happening insofar as trying to ensure food security in the country in concern and what she thinks is happening on the ground. So without much further ado, I think I want to invite Mr. Joram Gisheru to give us his presentation. Mr. Gisheru, are you online?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Hello?
Can you kindly, yes, we can hear you. Kindly share your presentation with us.
You also have can you see it?
I think it's loading, we can hold on for a few seconds.
Okay. Stephen.
Yes, Mr. Gisheru.
You can tell me once it rolls on your side, because I think for me I can see it on this end.
For you, it's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So as Mr. Gisheru is loading his presentation, I want to request all of us to mute our mics and also turn off our cameras so that we allow Mr. Gisheru to make his presentation for now. And in the meantime, please note that we have a chat box. As we go ahead, you can always raise your query within the chat box so that it will be responded to in due course as we move along. Thank you. So, Mr. Gisheru?
You can start?
Or perhaps I can load it from my end because we are not seeing it from here.
Yes, the only challenge now would be that going back and forth, but I think you can do it.
Yeah, you just tell me when to move, and you just tell me when to move on and maybe to go back.
Okay, so I can start.
Yeah, start as I'm
yes,
loading.
Yes, good morning, members to this webinar. My name is Joram Gisheru. I work as an associate with IEA, but generally I do consulting work in development. So I'm going to be looking at the status of the state of play of food security during the COVID-19 crisis. And I want to say that in the last 8 months or so, I think the country has experienced the most consistent rain for a long time. We have had, I think, rain since October, although in some places a bit intermittent, but generally the rains have been above average for 2 consecutive seasons. It doesn't happen a lot in this country. However, that was also followed by the outbreak of locusts in many parts of the country. And lastly, I think before we were even through with that, we had this crisis. The second thing I also want to bring to your attention is that generally, we have about 10 million Kenyans who suffer from chronic food insecurity. And those of you who are familiar with the food security issues, There's what we call acute food insecurity that happens when there is drought, for instance. People have problems of pasture, water. But there are some people who chronically, whether there is enough rain, whether there is no rain, whether they suffer from food lack of food consistent. And those are the ones we classify as chronic food insecure people. They are basically resource poor farmers and pastoralists and people who live in informal settlements. That means even with even before this crisis, the pandemic came, we have had consistent issues of food insecurity, and which have certainly been exacerbated by the crisis. The recent floods also, now coming to the crisis, the recent floods, localized market closures, slowdowns in the food supply chains have resulted in some increases in food prices. And in some situations, for some of the people who suffer from chronic food insecurity, being in schools for students has been a big plus because there are certain schools where school meals are served. So the fact that kids are not going to school now means that the children are also not having school meals. That means their food security situation has actually become worse. Then again, it's also important to notice that, and I think this is very important during this time, that when we think about food insecurity, we think of, and even nutrition security, we think about it in terms of security at individual level, at national level, at the international level, and even now at the community level, because we have the issues. There are certain communities, there are certain areas where there's food security, but there are certain communities now that are also suffering from food insecurity. So that distinction is very, very important. And when we talk about food insecurity, again, as part of the background, we think about 4 dimensions, or what we call 4 pillars of food security. Food availability, or food supply, if you may, which is we're talking about the food production reserves that the country could be having, or even farmers could be having, or even communities could be having. The ability to do commercial imports, as Stephen has mentioned, that we depend quite heavily on food supply imports for. Initially, for a long time, we didn't have this, but increasingly, initially we had staples, maize especially, and beans. But increasingly, we are seeing that we are getting imports of fruits, oranges, especially from Tanzania, vegetables now, fruits, onions from Tanzania, and now I'm told even tomatoes from sometimes Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, pineapples. So we are increasingly becoming a food importing countries. In fact, last year or the year before, our food import bill was something close to 100 billion shillings. And the last element of food availability is food aid. When we cannot be able to purchase and we cannot be able to produce, then sometimes you get the government, or we get some food aid from some countries or from institutions. The second dimension is accessibility.
As you continue, Mr. Gisheru, can you let me know? Hold on, please. Can you let me know to move to the next slide or to go back?
Then I'm on slide 9. Slide 9, please.
Okay. That one?
Stephen, are you there?
Is it the one on your screen?
Food access. Food access.
Yes, that one.
Are you there?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm sorry for that. The second dimension is is food accessibility,
Food access.
or the second
Okay.
pillar, food accessibility. And the food accessibility has two aspects: the physical access or supply, that you are able to access food if so long as you have financial resources, or you can farm it, or there are enough markets to supply. Then there is efficiency, distribution, and infrastructure capacity, which sometimes we find. We have found situations whereby there is enough maize in the North Rift, but people down in Ukambani or even some other parts of the country are not able to access it because of the inefficiencies, either in the markets or distribution capacity, or sometimes the roads are so bad the food cannot be moved. So that's the physical access. The other very important one, and I think this is one of the things we need to discuss today, is economic access. You could be having food available in the markets, but the prices are such that people cannot afford it. The prices are high. The people don't have incomes, and I think this is one of the challenges that we are facing with the lockdowns, that there could be food in the markets, but because people are not working, people are not able to access incomes, then they are not able to access food, such that they don't have financial resources to purchase the food. And this, and whether they are able to be assisted in situations whereby they formal or informal safety, social safety nets. Do we have social safety nets to ensure that people who have got no access to food, they have no incomes now? Are they able to access the safety nets? Social protection? We are told there's money that government has been giving. How efficient has it been accessed so that people can be able to buy foods? You can move to the next slide, Stephen.
We are there, food utilization.
Yes, and this is the question of food utilization. The third dimension is the food utilization, and it has several dimensions. Also, food safety, very, very important. One of the most important points to note is that this virus, the coronavirus we are talking about, actually originated from a wet market. It originated from a meat market in Wuhan, in China. So the question of food safety is very important. Then you have got issues of feeding practices and food preparation. There are certain types of foods that you could be having food, but people do not eat that kind of food. There are some communities whereby if you serve rice in the evening, for instance, people say they have not had food. And the issue of food preparation, again, if you move in the informal settlements, you find there's a lot of food. There's a lot of street foods. How good is the food? So issues of food quality, knowledge, standards, and the consumption behaviors. So that forms the third pillar. And Stephen, you can move to the next slide, 11. Kindly tell me when you are there.
Done.
Okay, yes. The fourth pillar is what we call food stability. Basically, food stability assesses all the other things. If you have got enough food, if it is accessible and affordable, and then it is good for consumption, then we say that country or that community or that individual, has food security and food and nutritional security. So, and certainly it is affected by weather and climate change, diseases, conflicts, and disasters. They can affect the availability of food, availability, access, utilization. So those are the 4 dimensions. Stephen, you can skip 12, you can go to 13, because 12 is just about a summary of the 4 dimensions.
Okay, so we are effects of the virtual lockdown.
Yes, now. So if there was enough time, really, we would look at the effects of the lockdown on each of those pillars, and even at the individual level, at the community level, and that. But now time does not allow us to do that. So what we are saying is that, therefore, in a summarized form, is that there's a situation of movement in some parts of the country, and the curfew has interfered with the supply of maize grains, for instance, and fruit imports from the East African region. On one aspect, even within the country, I think I should be able to say that at the movement of fruits and vegetable and fresh milk, even in the domestic market, we have seen what has happened at the border posts. I think on one aspect, we have seen what has happened at the border post. You know, a lot of those foods that are being tracked from Tanzania, from Uganda, they are actually fresh fruits, and therefore, if they stay, if initially a truck was taking, say, 2 days to move oranges from or onions or whatever else to reach Nairobi and then distributed, then it takes an extra 2 days. There's a lot of spoilage, and even internally, you remember the kind of confusion that were there at the roadblocks, so that people could not be able to move food. So that has had some implications in the supply. Yes, I think that is one of the main. Then the other one I think we should be able to talk about is the disruption of access. People are not able to go to work. That has been a big problem. I think, especially in the places in Nairobi, where people are not, especially people who are low-income earners, the ones who get paid daily wages to purchase food. I think they have had issues of accessing foods. And I think I had also mentioned this earlier, the closing of schools and other institutions have led to reduction of physical demand. You know, when you close schools, then the issue of demand has actually gone down, and also the wages, again, for some of the people who are working in those areas at the school meals again. So that has had serious effects on the children who get meals from schools. We can go to the next one. 14, Stephen.
Yes, go on.
Yes, and from some of the work that has been done by FUSE, the Food Array Warning System Network, you can see that, for instance, in April, I think this is tying to the first, the one I talked about, the food movement of food. According to FUSE network, the prices of food, of maize, for instance, in April, increased from 11 to 22% above a 5-year average, driven mainly by delayed supply of cross-border imports. And then in some counties also where there is work that these are just examples, but I think even if there was enough time, we could discuss many other areas. In Kirifi, in Tarakanidi, for instance, Wajir Madera, the above average maize prices also rose from 6 to 22%, again above the 5-year average. So you can see that in Turkana, for instance, Turkana Makueni, they rose from almost 6 to 21%. So you can see that this again has serious implications for low-income earners, especially when you have a bag of maize prices increasing from, say, 22% of, say, 3,000 is an extra 600 shillings. So you can see that's quite a big jump. We can go to the next one, 15, Stephen.
Go on.
Yes, I just want to, you can go to the next step. I mean, one of the things that I also have come across is that although this is not quite related to, okay, two aspects. There has been, I don't know, I don't know, we would have to check around whether the fresh produce markets for exports, especially flowers to the Netherlands and the fruits and flowers, I don't know whether the market has been opened, but you know there was a complete closure of the market for flowers. So for flower farmers, large-scale flower producers have had a serious challenge of their incomes. I don't know whether the market has been opened for fruits also, especially avocados and a few other fruits that are exported. So, but also not so much connected to the COVID-19, there has been a ban of flowers exports to Australia due to what we call chemical residues. When they test the residue levels of flowers, they found out there's a bit of residue that remaining, and therefore we are likely to lose as a country 40% of the Australian market. I don't know how big it is. So those are some of the things that we need to bear in mind about this disruption of cessation of movement and curfew. There is something that I also want to note, that is the point I've made about it, that I am not so sure that the locusts have had very, very, very serious effects. Maybe in the short term, maybe in the long run, we might be able to see the impact. But I think in the short run, because there has been so much rain, they don't propagate around during the very, very cold and very wet weather. But now with the throwing down of the rains, and maybe they are going to start multiplying. But I think so far in the short term, we have not had very, very serious, I think, impact from where I sit. I don't know, but from where I sit. So those are the things that those are the few points we want to make about the disruptions. And now I think we can go to quickly 16, Stephen, to interventions.
Interventions, yes.
Yes, and I have tried to organize them into the short term, medium term, and long run. One of the things that I note in the short term, maybe also in the medium term, is that our governments, we seem to be reading from different scripts. I think we need to agree on a common framework of protocol for testing people for COVID-19, so that we can smoothen the flow of foodstuff from countries. Because I think we have seen back and forth between Kenya and Tanzania mainly, but also to a small extent, I think currently the biggest backlog is around the border with Uganda. So I think our East African countries, we need to agree on a common protocol so that we can smoothen trade, not just for foods, but even for other things. What I've also seen, because when some of the markets were closed, like I think there was one time markets were closed in Thika, I've seen a lot of tracking, a lot of individual people are doing other things, but now they are selling foodstuffs. If you drive along the Eastern bypass from, as you go from Ruiro towards Ruaka, Widzauko, unakuta a lot of people are selling foodstuffs from the boots of their cars, which is a good way of trying to deal with these shortages. But I think also we need to, and in this country, there's a way things become permanent over time. We need to rethink food security and food safety and sanitation, because if you have 100 people who are now occupying, they are just selling food stuff from the sides of the road, and there's a place that there are no sanitation facilities. I think we need to think very quickly because they are likely to become permanent. Then the other thing that we need to, I think, make more efficient is the issue of social protection. We have had a lot of challenges, I think, in terms of, I don't know how successful we have been in in protecting people who are not earning incomes in the informal settlements. They have gross wages and incomes, and they need to be. I don't know how efficient that is. Otherwise, if they are not being assisted, there is a big problem of them going hungry. Now, I have just read in the newspaper that something to the effect that the government has developed a food sustenance strategy to develop a framework during this COVID for food security. I don't know what it means, the budget, but I think people who are in the budget interrogation, or rather when we get clearer what this means in terms of what the budget is saying, I think we can be able to discuss this much more. But otherwise, there is something that they talked about in the budget about sustaining strategy, but we need to interrogate that, as I've said. Next one is Stephen is on the medium term.
Yes, Rudolph. Yes,
I don't know again what the budget has said, but on 17 medium term, I think in the previous budget, and I think in the some of the interventions that government had proposed a few months ago, there was a talk of reduction of VAT on farm input. I don't know whether this has been the proposals that were read yesterday have revised this, but there was that so that farm inputs can be what is it called, generated, the VAT. I think we need to build the capacity of our farmers, and I think this is something we've been discussing even that in the long run, this country must decide whether we want to be a food importing country or whether because we are slowly losing our ability to produce enough food for our people. I think we need to address the issues of storage, better storage and processing. Like this year, we have had a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, but in a few months' time, when the drought comes, then we are likely to start having challenges. So, Stephen, I was reading as early as 1945 or 46, during the Second World War, in this country, we had actually factories that were processing, converting vegetables into dried foods and for the war effort. But this is something we have not been doing for many after the war ended and we got independence. We don't do it anymore. But these are things that used to happen those are the days. The question of maintenance of strategic food reserves, I think this is both the medium term and long term. I don't know. We have had changes in the government said not long ago that they're not going to be purchasing maize from farmers. So I don't know what happens now to what we are calling the strategic green or food reserve. We need to work around reducing vulnerability through productive safety nets. There are some people who have argued that instead of just helping people who are chronically poor, we need to, how can they be made productive so that they are not dependent on government for their food nutrition. We need to ensure that urban food markets work properly, and we certainly need to enhance opportunities for off and on-farm employment. We need to focus on improved nutrition and nutrition education in schools through school feeding programs when schools resume. I think even we've said this before. If you read about nutrition education, there are some very interesting aspects. For instance, they say that in Japan, when nutrition education was introduced in schools, the average height of Japanese improved by 1 inch. So it's a very, very important thing for children to know the types of food. I mean, this nutrition education should be really, I think we need to emphasize more on it. And again, there was as a way of attacking or dealing with this COVID-19, there was supposed to have been a stimulus package for around foodstuffs. I really don't have details on this, but it's something that we could look around. Lastly, Stephen, we can go to 18.
Long term?
Long term, yes. I think this is we don't want to overemphasize this. I think we need to produce efficiently. I think we need to become I don't know what Tanzania does or Uganda or now Ethiopia is doing that we are not able to do, because increasingly we're becoming a food and there a food importer. Therefore, I'm imagining that we are not producing food efficiently. And remember, we have got compared to those countries, we don't have a lot of land for agriculture. Therefore, we must think efficiency more than just extending the amount of land for production. We need to make distribution of food much more efficient. I have mentioned that there are certain reforms I've read about in tea and now in the maize sectors. We need to interrogate those and see the pros and cons. I've not seen a lot of debate revolving around those tea reforms. I've just seen farmers complaining. I don't know that they were involved. I've also seen now when government said they are not going to be buying maize from farmers in North Rift. I've seen farmers complaining. I don't know what those reforms. I don't know who has got these documents. We could interrogate them more, but we certainly need to interrogate the reforms in the agriculture sector. And then I also want to point out that reforms in the agricultural sector have been going on for so long, and we don't seem to really come to an end, and so that we can be able to say what is working and what is not working. We have been, if you look at the area we are talking about today, food security, we have something like that. Also, remember, Stephen, what we were discussing last time, that also documents on food security, and we are not sure what has not worked, so that we keep on developing new documents. So we need to really look at the reforms in the sector. Therefore, we need to generally think about improving the agricultural sector, but much more specifically the foodstuff sector. We need to rethink food trade, especially for staples, staple foods, and the focus on self-sufficiency. Some people have argued that after, well, I don't know whether this COVID issue, we are going to sort it out so that we can really talk about post-COVID, but there are certainly, we are really going to see a lot of changes with respect to food trade, I think, and therefore we need to start thinking. If this challenge we're having with Tanzania was gone for a long time, we can be sure that we can have serious challenges with food. We need to ensure that the chronically food insecure millions are able to purchase food. And in the long run, we really need to think food security on a sustainable basis. Good. So last one, conclusion, Stephen.
Yes, we are there.
Yes, and we are saying that as this disease unfolds, we are going to expect more disruptions in food production and supply, losses of incomes, and even remittances. We need to scale up successful interventions rapidly while engaging or empowering vulnerable communities. There has been talk about the e-voucher system for supporting, because you remember there has been fundraisers in the past to support small-scale farmers, which, as usual with our country, I think there were issues around corruption. So there has been talk, and I think the government is therefore implementing the e-voucher system, I think, where you use, you don't get physical fertilizer, but you get, I think, money in an electronic form to go and purchase fertilizer. I don't know how that will play out. We are saying that there are many Kenyans who are not food secure, even 10 million of them, even before the COVID-19. And I think we really need to think about how to deal with, because that's a big population. I mean, 10 million people is the population of Zimbabwe, you know, so and many other small African countries. So it's a lot, it's a big, I mean, it's a large number of people to be consistently famished. It is not a good thing. So we need to think about how to sort them out. Yeah, and therefore we need to rethink the interventions, the ones I've just mentioned, short-term, medium-term, long-term intervention to address the question of food security, and make hunger eradication a truly national goal across sectors, including government, donors, NGOs. And they maximize synergies between the twin tracks of long-term development for sustainable food security and investment in safety nets. And they implement the food and nutrition security policy. Currently, we are having the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy, I think, which was 2011 or 2014 there, which still has a very good proposals. I think we should didn't go out to implement it, so that instead of continuously developing new documents, because if you look at this sector, there are so many documents, but we develop new ones even before we have implemented the old ones. So thank you very much, members. I hope I've not taken so much time, but those are my thoughts about the state of play of food security during this pandemic. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gisheru. Thanks a lot. So Mr. Gisheru has actually taken us a bit. So we started by the dimension of food security. And I think for me, it's actually the way, just a minute, please. So it's actually in the way that these dimensions of availability, access, utilization, and stability work together. So that's one. Secondly, I think you also mentioned the issues that amid the COVID-19 challenge, schools were closed, transport systems were interfered with, issues of export also came along. So all this actually have led to some disruptions in the way that food distribution and supply is taking place, and that interferes with the food security in the country. Thirdly, you also mentioned the issue of actually wastage, which happens post-harvest, and there's need actually to look into that just to ensure that we minimize wastage when we harvest foodstuff from our farms. And also the issue of rising prices of foodstuff in places like Turkana, Wajir, I think, by as much as 11%, which is actually high. Imagine for every 100 bob, you have to cough another 11 shillings extra for you to purchase the same kind of food that maybe, for example, just maybe a maize cob. So you have to cough extra for you to get that particular item. Something interesting that I think I came across was actually what's happening even in my neighborhood. This issue of car boot sales. In my neighborhood, they sell all manner of stuff, from nduma to skumawiki to name it, cassava, whatever it is, even nyanya, tomatoes. And to be honest, the level of sanitation is wanting, to say the least, is really wanting. There's actually need to look into that before things get out of hand, because we know that sanitation is key in this during this period. In terms of the interventions, I think they are well taken. Probably we need to look at the long-term measures, but in the meantime, just to address what's happening now, it will be important to look at those the short-term interventions that we can put in place. And finally, of course, something we always talked about is implementation of the policies. The other day, there was also a new one that came after the food and national food security policy, nutrition policy. It's called the Agricultural Growth Transformation Strategy. I stand corrected, but I think that's the name. Which came,
agricultural growth and transformation strategy.
Yes, thanks, Joram. So that one, which came about 2 years ago, while the other one is still existing and has not been fully implemented, yet there are very good proposals that once implemented to fully would actually work to our advantage and ensure that we are on the path to ensuring food security. So I'll not take much of your time trying to recoup what Joram has said. That presentation will be on our website as soon as we end this particular forum. So to take us on, I'll invite Mr. Emmanuel Atamba. Emmanuel, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, kindly, Joram, you can switch off your camera, kindly. So Emmanuel, share with us your presentation. And we'd love to see you as well.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. Thanks a lot. You can make it full screen.
Yeah. You can see it clearly.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, and the rest of the IEA team for organizing this. My name is Emmanuel Atamba. I'm a research and policy analyst at Root to Food. So I would like to briefly talk about the impact of COVID-19 on food security. And then again, most importantly, is the food systems lessons that we can learn from this pandemic. And again, before I begin, also I'd like to thank Joram for that interesting presentation. I've actually picked a lot, and I'll try not to probably go back to the things that you already covered, even though I'd prepared to talk about some of them, but we'll try to just emphasize and see. Of course, we agree in most of the issues. Yeah. So the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know, I've not dwell much on it, started in December 2019, but by May 2019, it has spread to 182 countries and states and had infected more than 1 million people. I just checked the stats. I think now we are at about 7.6 million infections globally. And why it's important to have this background is that this is a very unique disease in our times. I think for those of us who are around my age, we haven't seen anything of this magnitude, and the nature of the disease and how it spreads is also something to take into account. In my research and my reading about COVID-19 and its impacts on economies and food security, I have seen a bit of trying to link it with other diseases. People trying to link it with Ebola, etc. But we must really appreciate the uniqueness of this pandemic and of the disease itself. And of course, now this is what now determines the kind of measures that are put in place to try to mitigate or to try to manage the spread of this disease. So, and then the impact of COVID-19 varies, so on developed countries versus developing economies is very different. For example, that most of the developed economies would have ability to afford social protection measures that are needed to safeguard or to cushion, the people during this time. There are countries that are already giving out, a bit of funds to channeling funds to people to be able to sustain themselves during this time. This is developed in the developed world. In the developing countries, it's a bit different. It's quite a different situation because also that our economies would rarely afford to effectively cushion all Kenyans who are of course affected by this pandemic. Either they have lost their jobs or they have lost their incomes and things like that. The same also applies to at individual level. So the effects of this pandemic on low-income earners, who provide manual, low-skilled labor, versus compared to now the impact on people who are in highly skilled professions. For example, some of us who are able to work and follow webinars from home. It's a very different scenario. It's the same disease, but very different effects. So the whole question of working from home, how many people does it apply to versus how many people will actually not be able to work at all because of the pandemic. So those are very key things I just wanted to highlight there. Of course, the impact of COVID-19 on economies globally is quite high. I actually tend to think that the impact of COVID-19 is much more felt on the economies, than on the health of the people. So try to think about it as a computer virus, as it were. Something that affects your operations. The ability of your computer to function. Eats up your files. Makes your work difficult. So this is more like an economic, issue than really it's a health issue. Of course, we have seen already reports. Experts have already, downgraded, of course, the projected economic growth globally from 3% to 1.5%. Here in Kenya, we have also halved it by half. We have also halved our projections. That was done by CBK governor already. And what this means is, the economic growth projections or the economic growth promises come with the promises for more jobs for people, come with promises for better public services. It comes with promises for, of course, issues to do with food security, issues to do with better healthcare systems. When this is cut into half, all those hopes are also cut into half. So it's not only a matter of the figures or the percentages, but it's actually issues that affect now the people on the ground. So, for example, all the young people would get jobs because of an expanded economy. Would now not be able to get those opportunities because if the economy doesn't expand as projected. And then, of course, the nature of the disease and the measures that need to be taken to control it has really affected businesses. It has, of course, affecting jobs of people who work in these businesses. In Kenya, for example, you look at the example of the flour industry, which has already projected to be to expect to lose about 60 billion by end of the year. Yeah, and the same sector has already laid off about 30,000 employees. Yeah. And these are employees who are formerly employed. Now think about now the casual laborers who work under these employees. So it's a very big challenge already with that one sector. Tourism and hospitality industry has been badly affected. You would know that the tourism and hospitality industry contribute about 18% of our GDP. Yeah, and this employs more than 1.1 million Kenyans. So if a sector like this is badly affected, now you see how many lives and how many households are affected as a result. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of a prediction of a global recession. We've seen reports that indicate that it could be worse than the 2008-2009 recession. We are more or less 6 months into the pandemic. Globally, we are yet to see some of these things coming out now clearly, but I know most of the people, most of the businesses are just operating on the edge. So unless of course measures are taken consistently to be able to come back to normalcy, even though Joram, of course, and I agree with him, as he thinks about whether there will be a post-COVID or not, we might not have a post-COVID. We might just need to learn how to live with the COVID situation. So let's see what happens. But there are a lot of indications towards a much serious global recession. So for food globally, as I now head towards the main topic of the day. There has been a lot of advisory against, of course, restriction of trade. Restrictions on trade. We know that globally we have a lot of restrictions on movement of people, but there's really no reason or cause of alarm at the moment for countries to start restricting, of course, flow of food in terms of putting in place export restrictions or ban on exports of important food commodities. But I think from where I see it, I see it as there's a lot of political pressure on government to basically try to limit the exports of important food commodities from their countries to other countries. And some of the countries are yielding to that pressure. As the list that I'm showing you, these are countries that have, at the moment as we speak, active bans on exports on those food commodities. So yeah, if you look at Armenia, for example, what would be relevant for us here would be things like garlic, would be things like millet, cereal, soybean, sunflower seeds. I'm trying to get to a point where now I can see which country we are depending on for a certain commodity that has now put a restriction. So that, but I know we might get to 1 or 2 countries that we import from making this kind of move, because there's increasingly a lot of pressure within those countries politically to have governments take measures which would be seemed to be protecting their citizens or to kind of protect their food availability. But it's really not necessary, because we need to, we can't have people on quarantine and then we also quarantine food, because this is literally like quarantining food. Yeah, so of course, this is continuing. There are countries that had export restrictions on their important food commodities that have already lapsed. But these are the current ones, as at yesterday, that have restrictions. Yeah. So the COVID-19 pandemic in Kenya, I'd like to talk about that. March 13th is the day that most of us don't want to remember. This is when we had the first case, and it really turned everything around. And then of course there are various measures that have been taken by the government. We have a ban on social gatherings. I think all these were captured by Joram, and restrictions of movement. We have had cessation of movement between in and out of Nairobi metropolitan, and then also the coastal counties. We have had cessation of movement in and out of Eastleigh, and in and out of Old Town in Mombasa. And I'll talk about Eastleigh a little bit, because those are the only 2 examples of like small areas that have been closed out, so that we just understand what the impact of that is. Of course, advisory against social activities, what has happened to our weddings, what has happened to our funerals, what has happened to our birthday parties. We have a curfew in place. At least now it isn't a little bit, because now Kenyans can have like a full working day, which is a bit, a relief compared to the situation weeks before today. So I'll talk about the lockdown, like the lockdown in Eastleigh and how it affected the flow of food. I think one day immediately after the cessation of movement was put in place and people could not move in and out of Eastleigh, the prices of food went up more than 2 times. Like people would not, the normal food commodities, potatoes, etc., tomatoes, vegetables, it was very difficult to get them. Eastleigh is a good example of understanding the kind of distribution channels we have in the country. Most of the food that moves from the markets in town to Eastleigh, or from other parts of the country into Nairobi and then to Eastleigh, most of this food, a good proportion of this food is moved through, the normal public transport. Our matatus, you see mama mbogas, hopping on a matatu with their baskets, and this is the way they distribute that food. So when you stop movement of people in and out, you are essentially also affecting a good proportion of food that moves with the people. So that is a very important aspect to look at it as, and again also this has been replicated across also when you're looking at cessation of movement around the Nairobi metropolitan area in and out. So it has affected a lot because in as much as there is still room for food to be moved, but this has to happen through formally registered distributors. Mainly these are people who are distributing food in large volumes, and we know that also some of our food items do not really necessarily come in large volumes. For example, it's very rare to see a truck full of groundnuts. Groundnuts will come in small packages. So someone will send groundnuts from Busia or from Siaya to a relative or a trader in Nairobi through like the normal public transport means in the boot, and then they can get like the 20 kilos or 40 kilos, and then they sell that. It would really surprise me to see a truck full of groundnuts moving from one area to to another. Of course, we are talking of when we're talking of the big markets also, but it would really be very difficult to see that. So the small transactions of food have really been affected by these measures that have been put in place. So of course, I've captured most of this just to run through and understand now, the food security question in Kenya. And I think Joram has really explained the pillars. I'll not dwell to that but I would just like to point out that actually COVID-19 has really opened our eyes to understand the actual problem that we have of food security. And it's not a problem of food production. It's a problem of access and affordability. That is what we need to work on as a country in the first place. We have been focusing our policies on production, and of course, we're only focusing on production of a few crops, a few staples. Funding is going a program to support a few value chains that we have made very important in the country. Of course, also now within those value chains, again, we have made our own preferences. So for example, the funding support or subsidies that go into maize, would go to, for example, Northrift farmers who are growing hybrid maize, Again, farmers in other areas of the country, in Nyanza, in Kisii, in Western Kenya, who are doing small pieces of land, do not necessarily get these subsidies because their production is assumed to not to matter. And yet, this is very important to, first of all, feed those households that do this kind of production. And then also, this is the same maize that gets back also into the market. So we have really been defining the food security problem in a wrong way. And I think now we really have to understand that it's not a question of production, but rather it's a question of access. And this access now, we are seeing it clearly because now people have lost, there's a bit of losses of jobs and incomes. And now we realize that it doesn't matter how much maize we have in the country. If people cannot buy the maize, then it's not useful, or it doesn't matter in terms of food security and the right to food. Food prices have gone up. I think Joram mentioned in Turkana or Garissa, if I'm not wrong. But also, I spoke to someone in Kangemi, I think that was in April, and I asked about food prices, and they also went up as much. I think she was talking about 15% to 20%. In terms of vegetables, especially when you're talking of vegetables now, traditional vegetables, which also move in small quantities. You don't have trucks carrying, black nightshade, which is our managu, or which other vegetable can I use, like jute, or in our local language we call it mrenda. We don't have a truck moving mrenda from Kiambu to Nairobi. I have never seen anything like that. But it moves in small quantities through the public transport, through small vehicles. Farmers put them in their cars and move them to where they are needed, but in very small quantities. So when you have restrictions of movement, then this kind of commodities now, getting this kind of commodities that move in small quantities into the market becomes a big challenge. Some of the key emerging issues again.
Emmanuel, can you try to sum up in 5 minutes?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, some of the key emerging issues are, of course, we are looking at now the food distribution channels, which have been now shown through this pandemic to be quite fragile, and we need to really work on that. We need to look at markets and market infrastructure. It has been very challenging to ensure safety while still keeping the food markets open. This is something that we need to look at also going forward. Identification of farmers has been a big problem. The president will pronounce himself very clearly, even when enforcing cessation of movement across the different areas that were, put on lockdown, that farmers can still move their produce. But, now the logistics of doing that, the farmers have to identify themselves to the police at the different entry points, but because they don't have any sorts of identification, including also small traders and small transporters, it has become a big challenge. And then now it has become like an opportunity for extortion of these farmers by the police, harassment. We have seen reports of that, and also basically some farmers have just had to give up trying to get their food to the markets that they usually supply to. And this is something that we really need to look at as some of the issues that have been coming up. So what lessons can we learn from this pandemic? We need to understand that we have been sitting with this problem of food and nutrition insecurity for a very long time now. It's not a new problem. And we really need to work hard as a nation, as a society, to address the actual problems of food insecurity, which, as I have said, will not be solved by giving farmers more diammonium phosphate, will not be solved by giving farmers chemical fertilizers or giving them seeds, or even subsidizing their production to zero. But it will be solved by ensuring that people, first of all, have the ability to buy. So when the consumers are empowered, then they can fuel the rest of the processes along the chain. So the problem is not really from production side. The problem is on the consumer side, the ability of the consumer to buy this food. We need to understand this problem. We need to define it properly. The problem of hunger and malnutrition. And then, of course, I've already explained the issue of whether it's production or whether it's access and affordability. And I really think it's an issue of access and affordability. So we need to work on safeguarding and operationalizing the right to food. We have the right to food expressly mentioned in the Constitution, Article 43(1)(c), but we do not have, for example, the Right to Food Act. We do not have mechanisms laid out on how the government can now come in, can now step in to ensure that it fulfills the right to food for Kenyans, for example, at a time like this, when they are not able to do it for themselves. Of course, now we are looking at disjointed distribution chains that have really been exposed clearly, that we really need to work on that. We really need to identify the distributors. We really need to build on that and support small businesses to do that. And my last slide, in terms of recommendations, of course, in the short term, the measures that are being put in place need to be properly coordinated. We need accountability. Yeah, even at county level, we don't need to have, like, for example, counties would come out and give food aid, sometimes through governors' foundations, sometimes through county government. The level of accountability is quite low at the moment. We do not know how much is going out. We do not know to who it's going to, including the COVID-19 stipend that is rolled out already. We need to maintain the flow of food while keeping sure that the markets are safe. I think Joram talked about this also. And then we need a bottom-up approach in terms of the measures and the social protection programs that are in place. And then we also need to recognize and enhance food sovereignty. Simple things like people being able to grow their own small amounts of food. We need to support our smallholder farmers who are growing about 70% of the food that we produce. And we need to support them to use self-sufficient techniques that would really, suffice, challenges like this. And we need to really think about alternative food and farming systems to ensure both safety and nutritional quality of the food that is produced. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thanks, Emmanuel, for that presentation. Yes, you can end your share. Thank you. Yes, thanks, Emmanuel. I think you've zeroed in mostly on what has happened locally, giving us an example of Whistly, which I like. So actually, we see that that particular lockdown during this pandemic caused an upshoot of prices of food items, which of course interferes with which needs you to dig deeper into your pocket to be able to afford food items. Also, I think Emmanuel talked to us about the importance of small-scale farmers, giving an example of movement of Mrenda. Actually, to be honest, I've also not seen Mrenda being moved in big lorries, as opposed to food stuff like maize and beans and tomatoes. So this moves in small quantities. So it's important actually that we also look into these other food items that sometimes are not in the mainstream. I think before we move on to Felista, just to mention, one key thing that Emmanuel has also highlighted is actually that the problem is not in production, but in access, that's accessibility, and affordability of food items that are at our disposal. So these are the items that actually the government are supposed to look out for in actually trying to ensure that they give us that particular right, as he has mentioned in Article 43(1)(c) of our Constitution, the right to food. So we'll just move on to the next presenter. Thanks, Emmanuel. Felista, are you online? As she's preparing, I just want to mention that on our chat box, you can ask your questions as we move along. And we're also conducting a poll. So you can look at it and give your thoughts. It's completely anonymous, so you don't need to worry. Felista?
Hi. Hello, Stephen.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
Hi. I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, can you
Yes,
go ahead
I'm
with the
ready.
presentation? Okay.
Okay. So first I want to thank Emmanuel and I want to thank the previous presenters for
Kindly share your presentation.
okay, just 1 second.
Okay, it's on. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. They have actually set the situation in which I'm going to talk, what has been happening in the market, what has been happening in terms of food security in Kenya. But so just to give a small introduction on the context of my presentation, I work with Ololo Safari Lodge and Farm. And with the work we do, we help a school in Kibera called St. John's for getting like a school lunch program for their school lunch program and building infrastructure. So this is how we get our information on the ground. I'm actually not myself living in Kibera, but I've gotten a lot of information from the interactions that we've had there, and this is why like my presentation is more focused on the urban poor. So they're the ones that are most affected. And what we realized from the presentations, the two prior presentations, is that COVID is let's say everyone has everything actually has a small problem, a disease, right? Whether it's personal, a business, government, the world generally, and we've just been feeling symptoms. Whether it's in your business, you've been feeling symptoms. But what COVID has done, it's actually diagnosed what the problem is. And in the food system, what Emmanuel says is what I really concur. It's really about it's about distribution and access of food. So that is the main problem that we need to treat, and that's what we really want to ask. What are the treatments that we're going to give to this kind of problem? So for the urban poor, actually in Nairobi alone, more than 60% of the population live in the low-income areas of Nairobi, and a lot of those are actually in the slums. So what? Okay, so when we talk about food security, we know we've heard about the SDGs, and they've been targeting food security in these 5 different dimensions of no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, climate action, and life on land. However, for the urban poor, what we're talking mainly is 1 and 2, that is no poverty and zero hunger, which really go hand in hand, and good health and well-being, which is actually a subset of zero hunger. So when we look at food, I mean, what we've realized is that, yes, we can talk about production. We can talk about how food is processed, how nutrients densities, how it is distributed, how it's brought into your home, and how it is discarded. But again, what we really haven't done as a country is to look at it as a whole system. When we're talking about food, not just looking at it as is there food for the people, but looking at it as a whole system, an integrated system. So this is where, I mean, like while we talk about how much production is being done by either small scale farmers or all farmers in total, we need to we can get comfortable that we have produced enough food for the country, but have we really been able to reach who needs it? So for looking at the food systems in the urban low-income areas, and checking about the production and sourcing, one thing that comes for sure is that the informal markets are the ones that matter the most. Up to 90% of the produce that is consumed in the low-income areas actually comes from is distributed through informal settings. So I remember Emmanuel was talking about how someone would get their food from the rural areas, and that is a really big, it's not about like trucks are being allowed to come into the urban areas, but then again, the matatus or that person, a conductor in one of the matatus that is coming from the rural area, you're able to give them a small fee, and your unga for every day will be sent, including also some items that you can sell, which is one of the main sources of income for small-scale vendors in low-income areas like Kibera, for example. So the processing is not done there; it's also outside. Most of it's done outside low-income areas. As we've talked about distribution, it is informal and mainly composed of the informal markets. There's the street vendors, kiosks, and mobile vendors, really not about supermarkets or big shops. And we have social protection programs such as school feeding programs that have a big impact on how much on how much food is eaten every day, or what is the nutrients dense food, or how it reaches the people. So literally, these social protection programs have a very, very big impact on low-income areas. So let's look at the consumer demography. Most of the people, I'm going to exemplify Kibra a lot because this is where I have a lot of information from. So most of the families actually live in a 6x6 kind of house with, on average, 6 children and maybe more adults, depending on, there's some that are staying over from, migrating from the rural areas. So those are 6 children. Normally they have 2 meals a day. Most of them have 3. A few of them have 3. Most of them have 2 meals a day, and there are some who have 1 a day. But now you'd find that the 1 meal that is had outside the home is just a small meal for adults that is bought very cheaply. Say you buy bananas, or you buy a mandazi, and if you have some extra, you can get some milk to go along with. But all those, imagine a family where all those 6 children are in school, they are being provided a lunch at the school. So you really don't have to worry about lunch. You have dinner to worry about. And if you don't have enough for that day, they can miss the dinner and then go have lunch in school. So that is the extent to which the food security issues in low-income areas are actually. So we know that 96% of people in Kibra, for example, are working, and 80% of those are in the informal sector. So, and what we've realized is that up to 70% of the people who are in who are doing work in the informal sector, they've lost their jobs because they don't have a contract. So without any warning, with really huge shocks, So let's see what have the effects been of COVID on the food system in low-income areas in Nairobi and other urban areas. So there is I'll go through this very quickly because it has been discussed before. The availability of food is low. The prices of food have gone up. There's market inefficiencies that we've realized. So food is not actually reaching there. Someone can't easily now just call home and say, send me food, because that means, they have to go also, even if it's sent, they have to go into the city center to get that food, which is, transport prices have gone up. So you can't do that. You'll lose your business because you won't make any profit. Or if you set it too high, also the people have lost their jobs, so they don't have enough money to buy the food. And then there is affordability, which now is a very big issue right now. There was the drastic loss of income, as I said, 70% in the informal sector have lost their jobs, especially in Kibra. And that means that they're not before. You would say they would someone would go out, they would buy a few things njugu for 5 bob, they'd buy a fruit for another maybe 10 bob, 5 bob, during the day someone would even afford to take juice. Now look in a situation where right now, what the main focus is in buying food that gives energy, that can, like ugali, for example. You know, people are not concentrating on buying juice anymore, fruit juice or fruits and other vegetables. The main thing that is now being concentrated on is just filling up the stomachs. And looking at that, you know, you're seeing a switch in diet. People are cooking more at home. They're not buying a lot of food. Now there are a lot of people who are working, who are doing small businesses within those low income areas, especially women. So that is selling food, with either whether cooked or raw. Those are really affected because right now people are not buying food. They're not, especially like if you're depending on selling. I keep using this example. You're depending on selling chapati. People are not you know, going to buy chapati now. So that means you have to get a new way of earning money. And right now, new job opportunities are really low. So the whole, it's like it's all about, like, you know, they've lost jobs and they can't buy food. But now even the economy that has been created within Kibera, the local economy is already shattered. So those who are depending on the people who are working outside Kibera to bring in some money are not getting it. So the situation is really bad, such that people are going hungry and they're sleeping like up to 3 days. That is the statistic I got from the ground: 3 days without food. So if we look at the demography again, we have it's not uniform. So there is the older people, there is the single mothers who have to take care of like a lot of children. There is children. There is people living with HIV and other pre-existing problems. So these are the ones who are affected the most. And if they can go 3 days without food, I mean, especially people with HIV, it is devastating on their health. So what's this? The coping mechanisms they've had is like skipping meals, eating less. You know, there's really no diversity in the food they're eating. It's mainly ugali. If they can get some sukuma, omena is very prevalent like now. So the source of the nutrients is really limited, and purchasing food on credit from the kiosk, and that you can only do like 2 or 3 times before the kiosk owner will tell you, I can't give you any more, or the kiosk owner actually gets in debt and is not able to buy more stock for the shop. And then there is reliance on assistance from relatives also, which is limited because now you can't. It's not easy to get food from the rural areas. So these are generally like the problems that are being faced. And what has been done already so far, there is the government has distributed funds, which we also know that haven't targeted those who need the most, the vulnerable ones, the ones I talked about, the children, the youth who have lost jobs because of dependence on informal sector, the people with pre-existing health problems. Those are the ones that would have been targeted first because they're really, really vulnerable. While, you know, everyone actually needs help, there should be a priority. But yes, the government is doing something, but it's also a lesson on how government can do something even better in the future. There is NGOs and businesses that have really come up. Like I was just reading recently on you know, different companies coming together and creating a movement, sensitizing people and distributing food packs and water. And this is really a good thing. It's actually a hope, because when you look at it, what controls our economy, it's never really about the government, it's businesses. And that means like each and every single person can actually do something to work around the situation, especially for the immediate help that is needed. And I do like that the, you know, organizations are taking sustainability strategies, CSR, very, very important. So it is a part of their strategy, and they're coming out and giving out, you know, helping out as part of, you know, their image. It helps them. It helps the people on the ground. Then there is really kind individuals also distribute food. A limitation to this is also, you know, while you want to help, there's very little information on how to help with sensitivity, you know. So I was just even listening to a story from the headmaster of the school where we were working with, and someone promised to bring, food. Yes, they've contributed. It's with a very high personal expense, and announcing that the food is going to be distributed. He comes with food for 50 people, really well intended. But if people are spending their day, every day, waking up, going from NGO to NGO, going to different places to find if there's any free food that is being donated. So 1,000 people come and there's only food for 50 people. That just brings chaos, So there needs to be that, there needs to be an order in which people help. People need to understand that what the situation is actually on the ground, how the hunger is actually very extreme, and learn on how to target their help rather than just appearing and announcing that there's help. That could even bring worse problems. So I'll give you a bit of background on what we do with the St. John's Kibera.
Please, Felicitas, you do that, please note you have 5 minutes to go.
All right. Okay, that sounds good.
Thanks.
So, all right. So we started working with the school on a program, on a school lunch program, because we were donating some extra eggs that we had, and we realized that they didn't have enough food. Previous program had been cancelled. So what Ololo Safari Lodge in the farm, they partnered with another organization called Nice Coffee Company, and came up with generated funds for the school. And again, so when we looked at it, we decided to have a proper strategy, because we'll give food, yes, but what happens when we cannot? Like this moment where COVID has hit us, we're in the tourism industry. Atamba talked about 18% of the Kenyan GDP depending on tourism. There are no international guests coming in. Ololo depends on that. So now what do we do in a situation where now we don't have the extra to help? It's been in our strategy to help the school to have a small farm, having sack gardens to be able to produce their own. So those are the kind of measures that we've been thinking about. Another thing we do with them is we've helped build the classrooms. As you can see in this picture here, they were really dim lit, but now we have better classrooms constructed in the school. And another thing that we've done is eco camps. Now, I'm giving these examples because these are the kind of longer term strategies that people who are, because we've realized that school lunch programs are really important, people who are doing this can think as a sustainability measure over the long term. And one of the things, the other things I'm talking about is the eco camps. We help the children come over to our farm. Our farm is an organic farm, regenerative. We use regenerative land management systems. So we educate them on how to grow food in small spaces, in small bags. And we teach them how to feed the soil without chemicals. We teach them about the importance of food, how to cook. We take them to the lodge kitchen, and our chef teaches them how to cook nutritious food that is properly cooked and can deliver those nutrients that they really need, how to bring in diversity in food. So these are issues that children need to learn. When they grow up, they're going to be responsible people. Another point is that we work with Nairobi National Park and another organization called Brachynology. We bring the children into a systems thinking, in that they learn in the forest, they learn in the wildlife park, they learn about conservation in the farm. So this is a wholesome kind of education that a child, whether they're going to do engineering, they'll be thinking about, if I am going to do this, am I going to destroy the soil? So that is when you give help, I feel like there needs to come, and now we feel it even more. There needs to be a strategy, a wholesome strategy in how you're bringing that help in and look into the future. Of course, I've said, and the previous presenters have said that there needs to be a change. We need to do something, and some have to change now, and others have to change in the future. It's obvious. One thing we've learned, that our food system is just, it's not good. It's broken, and there is also low inclusion of businesses in low income areas. and also farmers, as we've said. They are vulnerable groups. There's the youth, for example. So this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to do something. We know the problem now. We've learned. We're learning on how to cope with it, but we have an opportunity to reset our system. So while COVID is really devastating, the effects that it has, we need to come out strong and say we made a change. That if anything comes again as devastating as this, we'll be able to pull through smoother. So one of the things I realize is that the organizations that have been working in these low-income areas, for example, they have information, they have a good experience, they know how to work there. This is really valuable information that can be shared and can be formalized if it's shared with the government and among organizations. So partnerships are very, very important right now with small organizations and government level organizations, agencies. So this way, it will be easy to target special groups, children, people with pre-existing problems, women, single mothers, and then this inclusion of finding a way of registering small businesses. This way, like, it would be easier to subsidize the produce that they're getting, and enable it to be to maintain at a lower price that the residents of low-income areas can actually purchase. So I think that is something that we can take away from this pandemic. And of course, more resilient food systems. We've talked about, how the chemicals that are being sprayed already we're using chemicals that are being are harmful and are not allowed in the countries we export to. For example, they're harmful to our soil, they're harmful to our health. So if we can find ways to produce food that is really good for the soil, making the soil better, regenerating it over time, we'll make a better economy, because yes, we'll have a bigger market. We'll have a sustainable production system under the soil, and start thinking as in terms of ecosystems rather than targeting one problem, because no one problem is actually a single problem, isolated problem. So we need to think about nutrition dense foods and other ways that we can deliver. I know it is sometimes like it is not in our culture to eat things like crickets, but I know like some like I come from the Western area, we eat termites and all of that. These are things we can look into to see how we can bring more nutrition in smaller packs, without really depending on the expensive meat and all of that. So resilient farming systems such as permaculture, which I really advocate for, that is really wholesome, holistic, organic farming, regenerative farming. That is what I would recommend. This would give us, because they're very productive systems. At the same time, they are better for the environment, and we'll be able to export our food to places that we haven't right now are being banned. So I think those would be my recommendations from the ground. And everyone can do something. You can do something in this situation if you're in a better place than another person. Thank you.
Thank you, Felista, for that wonderful presentation. Interesting that you'd suggest we consider termites and crickets. It's source of proteins, yes. Some of us eat it, some of us don't. But again, thanks for the presentation. Before I hand over this to my colleague John Mutua, who will take us through the plenary session, just to highlight a few things that stand out for me. I think in Felisa's presentation, she mentioned what has been done by the government, individuals, and the CSOs and NGOs. Yes, it's important that we actually do that sort of assistance, but in a targeted manner. Because as it is, we are not quite sure that whatever the government has allocated reach the intended persons or households. So that's something that I think we need to take on head on and actually look into ways that will be much more targeted to those who are vulnerable. Yes, there's need also to ensure that we not only focus on one particular item, but the entire ecosystem as it is, and also encourage resilient farming, actually trying to look at the changing weather patterns and pests and disease and natural calamities like the locust invasion that we faced the other day. And I think for me, what cuts across all the three presentations, which is key, is actually the issue of affordability of food and food items, and as well as accessibility. Because from what I learned from our three presenters is that food is available, so it's a matter of making it accessible and making it cheap, not cheap per se, but affordable to individuals and households. So, John Mutuai online. Hello, John. Hello, just a minute as I try to get a hold of John. So as he comes along, still waiting for him to come on. I'd like to shoot maybe a few questions. If you have someone in the audience who'd like to present a question or ask a question or make a comment, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentations. I particularly enjoyed the second one. I'm sorry I did not catch the presenter's name. My name is Sharon, and my question is that, yes, indeed, there's a major problem in terms of distribution and getting food to market. And it's not uncommon. It's very true that many people are small-scale farmers. And in fact, people in Nairobi are known to be small-scale telephone farmers. And I'm wondering if there are any ideas on what, now that we find in containment in Nairobi, how can we prepare for harvesting season? And what can be done in terms of getting that produce from upcountry, from our rural home areas to Nairobi? Because a lot of times we depend on that food for our own sustenance and also for, small scale sales. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. I hope Emmanuel got that question.
Yes.
So, before you proceed, any other question? Okay, let me allow you to answer, but as you do that, there's a question for for all of you, which is from Vona, and she asks, which food products would the panelists advise a farmer to grow within this period for commercial purposes? So that's a question to all the panelists. And again, this is specific to Joram. So a question from Shelmit Mugo, who asks, how do you propose the vulnerable are assisted through productive safety nets, considering most of them are in ASAL areas and urban slums? So you can answer any question. Let me begin with Felista.
Stephen, could you please repeat that question? I didn't get it.
Okay, so there's a question from Vona, and it's to all the panelists. She asks, which food products would the panelists advise a farmer to grow within this period for commercial purposes? So that's looking at the pandemic period.
So I would actually recommend, yes, there needs to be the high carbon foods, but also we need to think about nutrition. So in any farming system, I would recommend to grow foods that are diverse. So if you're able to grow diverse foods, look at what Kenyans eat every day, and grow those ones. So there's those indigenous vegetables, tomatoes, onions, and if you have a big piece of land, yes, you can grow some corn, but try to integrate it with the other crops as well. So I wouldn't recommend one single crop. And I would actually recommend a diversity of crops, which would be also important in maintaining diversity, making sure that you don't have just one crop that you're depending on. If there's a pest or disease that comes, it wouldn't sweep everything away because they are targeted for different plants. So I would recommend you look at what Kenyans want to eat, and they do want a variety of things, and then grow that. Find different ways of combining them in companion planting and rotation and all of that. Yes.
Thanks, Celesta. So, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that question. I think I agree, first of all, on the question from Viola. I agree with Felista that it has to be a holistic process, and I will not dwell on that because of time. But on the question that was asked by Sharon on what telephone farmers can do now that they are locked in Nairobi and they can't access their farms themselves. And this is the challenge exactly that I was trying to talk about in terms of distribution, because not all our food is moved in trucks that have been licensed to move. So we need to really see how we can now manage between ensuring that food continues to move as it used to move. Most of the food that we produce is a good proportion of the food that we produce is shared, for example. So I know Sharon is concerned also that people who are locked here and they have farms elsewhere. They are not able to even go there and manage those farms. So they have to rely on people who are there to manage the farms on their behalf. And sometimes it doesn't come out with the same, the same results. So it's quite a challenge, but I think we just have to wait and see the recommendations that will come out from the meeting with the Council of Governors and the President on Wednesday, and see if in the next 1 month some of these considerations would be made, so that at least we can ease in the movement of people. There's no any other way we can actually move food, because otherwise, if you move through the cargo or registered cargo transport means, it now becomes costly. So it doesn't make sense for you to get a few pieces of avocados now from your farm. You'd rather just buy them outside, because then the cost is very high to get them from your farm. But it's very important for people to have their own production, even it doesn't matter how small it is, because even if the food doesn't get to you, you can transfer it to someone else who can access it, and then you can use those funds to maybe access your own food.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Joram? Hello, Joram, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen.
Okay, go ahead.
The question on what products to produce now is, you see, there are many variables in deciding what to grow. The question of what time span. Are you talking about 1 month, 2 months? I don't know. The time span. What resources do you have? If you, and in terms of the resources, we are talking about the amount of land. There are certain commodities like vegetables you can grow on a very small area of land and be able to do several crops in a year. So what type of resources you have, and then also the amount of risk you are willing to take. Some of the commodities that pay a lot of money, they have high returns, they are also very, very risky. So it would depend really on one would have to sit down with the farmer and have this discussion, so that you can get pinned down what commodity to produce. The time you have, the time you have, the resources you have, how discoverous you are, or how all those things. But if you have very small pieces of land, if you have got water, then vegetables you can do. The turnover is good. You can do many crops in a year. you don't have you have a lot of land, then maybe then you need a lot of resources also, funds. So the outlook.
Jeremy, you are breaking off.
Sorry.
We can't get you clearly.
Can you get me now? Hello.
A bit better.
How about now?
Yeah, that would do.
Yes. So I don't know. So I was saying that there are a lot of things that you need to take consideration of. The resources you have, how willing, the type of risk you are willing to take, the resources you have, both in terms of land and even financial resources for you to decide the crop. And I think also there's also something I want to agree with Emmanuel regarding the forecast. I think food security for a long time, the focus has been on production. And if you look at most of the policy documents, they don't really talk much about accessibility, which I think, and I agree with him, is the area that we really need to focus on. Thank you.
Stephen, I think you are muted.
Steve, you're on mute. Steve, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Thanks. So I was saying, this goes as well to Sharon. You need to look holistically at the entire process if you want to grow some crops within this period for commercial purposes. So, as rightfully mentioned by all the presenters, land, the sort of farming input you have, and depending on the area you are, what sort of crops can do better in that particular area or region. So I don't think it's a one fits all. So you just need to look at those three together. So let me see if John, are you here?
Yeah, Steve, I'm back. Sorry, apologies. My laptop misbehaved at the hour of need. Yeah.
Technology sometimes can let you down. Thanks. So we have actually completed the first round of questions. I think I'll throw it to you, and you can take it over from now.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So I don't know whether you've gone through all the questions in the chat box, Steve.
Yes, I did.
So I would like to invite our participants. If there is anyone who has a question, please, you are welcome, and you can actually unmute your mic and pose whatever question you have or comment. I don't see any additional questions in the chat box. Anyone? Hello?
We are here, but I think maybe everyone is satisfied.
Steve, did you run through all the questions in the chat box?
Yes, I did. There are just 3 questions.
Yes.
And they've been answered by the panelists.
So, do we have any question from? Of course, I could also ask the panelists to weigh in on the poll question that we have, as we are inviting our participants to ask I mean, to pose their questions or make their whatever comments they may have. So again, this is open to the panelists. So we have this poll that's running. So maybe they can also weigh in on this. So what measures do you think, and this is open to all the three panelists, what measures do they think the Ministry of Agriculture should devise to ensure uninterrupted food production in the wake of COVID-19? So we had two choices, three actually. The first is to extend cash and loan support for poor farmers, for banks to offer interest moratorium on farmers' loans, and extend payment deadlines, and then there's other. So again, let me open it as we see whether there's anyone who is going to, I mean, anyone who has a question. So maybe we could start with Joram. And I know you may have alluded to some of the measures in your recommendation, but what do you think about this? What are your thoughts on this? Joram, and then Emmanuel, and then you can go all the way to Felicita. Joram?
This is a question on the Minister of Agriculture. Did
Yes.
I hear correctly? One of the choices, one of the areas is the question of cash and loan repayments, or the loan repayments. The second one. What are the choices? What are the?
Yeah. So we have the first choice is to extend some cash and loan support.
Okay.
Then the second one is for banks to offer interest moratorium on farmers' loans and extend payment deadlines, and the other. So basically, what are your thoughts on these? If you have something that you specifically think maybe the ministry should focus more on, yeah, you can just weigh in.
Yes, I think. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr.
Yeah,
Mutua.
Joram.
Yes, I think. Are you hearing me?
Yes, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Can I start with the second one? The one on there are two ways. One of the banking sector, the financial sector has been very risk-averse. I think there has not been very, especially for the small-scale farmers. We have not had it. We have not succeeded very much in extending financial services, especially credit to the small-scale farmers. So in answering that question, I think the main provider has mainly been the Agricultural Finance Corporation, which is a government corporation, and therefore I think it's possible to work out some ways of extending this interest moratorium on farmers. I think government can pick that tab. For the other banks, I think they only finance very well structured. The biggest problem with financial services is that when the farming sector or the specific commodity sector or the commodity itself is not very well structured, market-wise, it becomes difficult to actually provide credit. So what am I saying? If you look at coffee, if you look at milk, if you look at maybe tea, if you look at maybe flowers, then I think it's possible because data is there. Data is there to show that because what I've been finding even with the normal loans is that banks are saying that there must be proof that this area has been affected. So I think for the well-structured markets, commodities, and where data is available, it is possible to work around some kind of moratorium. Of course, where there is no data for small-scale farmers. And in answering this question also, I think we need to go to the question of market support. Because I think one of the biggest problems that having farming, the community generally as a country don't have a lot of information about even market. You know, there are certain crops that are very high value, but you don't know how much money. Say, for instance, say tomatoes. There's a lot of money that in tomatoes or even potatoes, but I don't think we have got now data that we can go to a financial organization, say that there's the amount of money that, and therefore it becomes the support. So I think moving forward, the Ministry of Agriculture, they have been talking about this agricultural statistics. We really need, but I think Emmanuel also talked about registration of farmers. We really need to know who is doing farming, what they are farming, and therefore to help to give them support becomes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Joram. And it seems the connection, I think you seem to have some challenges with the connection from your end. Emmanuel? Any thoughts around these three? And because we seem not to have any additional questions, then you can also, as you weigh in on this, you can make your final remarks.
Okay, thank you, John. I think what I want to say about this, it's an interesting question because, but all of it is focused on one aspect, which is finance. Okay. So I think for farmers who have already, or farmers who have been using, these facilities, I think for me, I would say that both the two measures, the extending cash loan support, but also the moratoriums for farmers who already have loans and are not able to repay, all of them would apply. But again, I would like to just emphasize that in terms of financing for agriculture and loans for agricultural production, it's a very tricky balance. In the private sector, on the flip side, this is now, I think, public sector. We are talking of now the Agriculture Finance Corporation, which I also don't think that quite many farmers take loans from. I know quite a few farmers would access loans from AFC, but it's not really like a very significant number of farmers in the country compared to the total number of farmers in the country. But we are seeing a lot of private sector projects or programs or businesses coming in to support farmers with either loans in cash or loans in kind in terms of inputs. And it's highly unregulated. And there's a lot of outcry in this area, especially in Western Kenya, about some of these farms, who do not really have some sort of, the farmers are not trained in the first place on how to use these funds. So they are given loans, they go ahead and, make chapatis, make parties, some of them would even pay dowry because they would not understand that this is the money that you invest. And then now, as Joram has said, that most of these farms are really risk averse. They already have their systems in place to come in and recover. So they go for property, they go for livestock. Some farmers have even had their iron sheets removed, and their furniture is taken out of their house because they're not able to pay loans. So for me, I would think that the biggest problem is our appetite to try to maximize or to really instead of looking at optimizing our resources. I think farmers need to be supported. I think the first priority of the Ministry of Agriculture should be right now to revive extension services, so that farmers can be able to practice farming that is less risky compared to farming that they're doing now, where they don't have any kind of extension. That would be very important for me, so that you're reducing the risks in the sector, so that whether these farmers are getting money from loans to invest in farming or they're using their own investments in production, there's at least some level of success in production, because then they know what they're doing. As my parting shots, I think I would like to just reiterate the importance of us also advocating for the right to food. And I saw maybe in one of the questions, someone was trying to point out that most of the affected, I think that question was missed, I think, in the chat, that most of the affected people are either in informal urban settlements or are in arid and semi-arid areas. It is true that the problem of hunger is much bigger in arid and semi-arid areas. By already before even COVID, there were about 2.1 million Kenyans who are in need of actually food aid in urban and in arid and semi-arid areas. But it's not entirely true to say that these are the only areas that are problems. Even people in the middle income now, are struggling to put food on the table. People getting the basic food, issues of nutrition are not taken care of, issues of safety. How many people can afford what is being sold in the market as organic food, for example, because we know that will be the most preferred type of food for people to eat. So the problem is not anymore far from us. The problem is very close to us than we think. I think we need to address it in that way. The right to food has two phases. The first phase is very simple, that no one, of course, is exposed to hunger. No one has to die because of hunger, or no one has to suffer because of hunger. Then the other part is that everyone has to access adequate food. So in as much as we are looking at the fact of eradicating hunger completely, we also need to start championing for a food, food systems and governance, approaches that would lead us to ensuring that everyone has access to now adequate food. And that is, I think, that is where we should also be taking the conversation. Thank you very much for having me today. Thanks.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah, Felicita, you can also, if you like, weigh in on that question, and then you give your parting shot. And also after that, then I would also like to welcome Joram again for his final remarks.
All right. So, what I actually think about the question, I think the Joram and Emmanuel really touched on the important things in terms of finance. But to add onto it, I think there needs to be help for the farmers to actually access the markets, get the produce off their hands, so they can concentrate on production. So that would mean creating a better distribution system, and maybe providing that in terms of before, like when there was transportation of, say, coffee and milk into processing, then if there could be a way to be able to find a way farmers can finance farmers to transport their food into the market. I think that would be another thing that the Ministry of Agriculture can do. As for my parting shot, the whole I think looking at COVID, it has actually shown that we need to approach everything in a system kind of way, an ecosystem kind of way, and that is different people will play different parts, but in the end they should be targeted to be holistic and to bring proper effects to the food system that we have currently. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Felicitas. Felicita, Joram, 1 minute, parting shot.
Yes, I think agriculture generally, and therefore food security, is mainly a recovery function. A lot of government, national governments, support counties, policy. I think I would like to urge and request IEA and other agencies to look at what is happening in counties, especially in terms of supporting agriculture. One of the biggest challenges we have as a people, as a community, and as a country is that we like big things, we like shouting things. Agriculture is very quiet. Food security is not high profile, and therefore you cannot be able to bring a face study to show him. So and therefore, unless institutions like IEA are able to interrogate the financing, we are going to continue having this challenge of quite a bit of work that needs to be done should be public good. I mean, it's public good, and therefore that can only happen from the country. So I would like to request John and Stephen, try to see whether you can interrogate the resources that are going to agriculture. You'll be shocked that there is very good support. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Joram. So before we bring this to a close, Steve, please let us know where we are going with this. The way forward, Steve.
Yes. So yes, Joram, I note your concern about magnifying allocation of the counties and probably putting food security issues on the map, so to speak. But moving forward, we'll be having a follow-up webinar, maybe to interrogate further these issues. But in the meantime, all these presentations will be available as soon as we're done with this one on our website, and all of our participants and members can access. So I want to thank you all for making time to join us for this particular webinar, and I invite you for future webinars on other topical subjects in the near future. Thank you so much. John?
Yeah, thanks a lot again to our three panelists, Joram, Gesheru, Emmanuel Atemba, and Felista Orangi for those insightful insights, basically. And I must say, I'm educated, and I believe you've educated our fellow participants regarding issues of food security and some of the realities that we are facing. So thanks a lot. And also to Steve on behalf of IEA Kenya, thanks a lot, Steve, for putting this together, and also for Michelle and our communication team. And just to mention, as Steve has said, we'll continue with this conversation in our social media pages, and there will be a brief on this that Steve will prepare, and that will be posted on our website. Otherwise, thanks a lot, and I would like to note that we have we have a webinar on post-budget analysis next week on Tuesday, so you can look out for that. Otherwise, thanks a lot, and have a good afternoon. Bye.